Well, welcome everyone to today's Industry Connect. For those who don't know me, my name's Mark Henderson and I'm the CEO of AHI. Firstly, before we get into today's interview, I just want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we meet on today, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And in particular, I would like to acknowledge any Indigenous viewers of this interview. I want to welcome you with open arms to today's Industry Connect. And I must say, AHI is a passionate supporter of reconciliation. Today I meet with Ria Bailes. Ria is the Group Director of People and Change with One Housing in the UK, and she's also the Non-Executive Director of Fair for All Finance. One Housing is based in London and manages in excess of 17,000 homes and providing homes to around 35,000 customers. One Housing has over 8,000 customers with a range of needs, including people with lived experience of mental health, older people, people with learning disabilities, and those experiencing homelessness. One Housing supported 238 customers into paid work in 2018-19, and the business is not a small one. It turned over £213 million in the 18-19 financial year. So we've got a bit of a trend happening here with some international guests, which is great for everyone here in Australia and New Zealand. So I want to welcome our guest today, Ria Bailes, all the way from the UK. Welcome, Ria.
Thank you so much, Mark. It's great to be with you.
Excellent. Now, Ria was just telling me she's got a brand new puppy in her household. So we might talk about that a little bit later, or we might even have the puppy come on camera, Ria, just for an international audience to see your new dog. But look, Ria, I think probably it'd be really good, giving a little bit of a background, a brief on One Housing, but just wondering whether we could just throw to you with a bit of history about the organisation, just so our viewers here in Australia and New Zealand can get a bit of a feel for One Housing.
Yeah, certainly. So, as you said, Mark, we operate around London. Over the past few years, probably 5-6 years, we've started to expand slightly out into the home counties, but that is predominantly stepping into care and support areas. So, recognising that the UK has a real challenge around ageing population and the care provision, with overly stretched local authorities and government funding around that. So kind of once again, it falls within the not-for-profit type sector to try to step into that space and provide that much needed care for our older people within our communities. Our core part of the homes that we manage are all around London. We have a small amount that are just slightly outside. But what that means in terms of the characteristics and what we're dealing with is quite high density kind of aspects. So we do an awful lot of work around our estates, around community work as well, and that very much is kind of the core of what we're doing. So whilst we are large enough, we like to think that we can really make an impact. We also try to certainly go that we're small enough that, you know, we can absolutely recognise at that grassroots level and really have kind of that community work and that community feel to us as well. Having said that, I visited Australia just before Christmas and was absolutely kind of overwhelmed by strength of the relationships that you have with your residents. And I think the larger that you get as an organisation, as a housing association, we've certainly seen a compromise in that in the UK, because I think you're kind of the relationship naturally, as you have so many more residents that you're kind of looking after homes for, that kind of relationship starts to get a bit stretched simply because of scale and volume. So as you said kind of in your introduction, we also play a role in providing our residents with employment services, training. So we do try to recognise that a home is not just a home. Of course, it provides, you know, the kind of the vital security and safety that people need. You know, it's a very, very highly emotional product, essentially, you know, to deal with. But it is only kind of one aspect, of course. It's just one cornerstone to kind of communities and to kind of people's lives.
Yeah.
So our vision, we call it, is creating places for people to call home and to support people to live well. We really proud of just the breadth of the offer that we provide, from homes for kind of general needs all the way through to kind of youth activities, older care, mental health services, as you said.
Yeah, and that must help create that stronger bond. And noting your comment around scale, Ria, that delivering of services beyond just the housing into your community must reinforce the value that one housing provides to the people, your customers, your 35,000 customers. Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, I think it is. And I think one of the challenges that we have actually is to try to articulate to people the breadth of actually what we do. Because, of course, I think people tend to come to us just with a single need.
Mm.
In actual fact, kind of, you know, being able to inform them of the breadth of the things that we do is a really important part, I think, of our brand and of our purpose and kind of and why we're here.
Yeah,
Well, and as you say, it plays really well, I think, with our stakeholder relations, so that we're able to have really good partnerships with our local authorities because we're working on a number of different fronts with them, from homelessness through to mental health areas, through to working with the NHS,
mm.
trying to kind of get people out of hospitals into our care as well. So it's quite good to be able to work in a bit more of a kind of a holistic basis.
Yeah, absolutely. We probably can't have a conversation without mentioning COVID-19, Ria. So let's just jump to that. It's obviously and in high density living very challenging. You might have seen here in Australia a big challenge around a 3,000 population, high density living here in Melbourne that's been completely locked down and segregated, which is causing a number of issues. And noting obviously COVID-19 and what's happening in the UK as well. I just wonder if you could cast your mind back, Ria, like moving into lockdown, you and the executive at One Housing, what were you concerned about going into lockdown? And did any of those concerns come to fruition? What's the kind of lessons you've learned over the last 14 or so weeks coming out or coming through COVID-19 and the impact it's had locally?
Yeah, maybe let me tell you a bit of a story, perhaps,
Yeah,
Mark, which
yeah.
might be the best way to kind of illustrate maybe that kind of first week or two, because I think they were the really, really big kind of impact bits for us, certainly. So I remember that week, so Sunday, I was meant to be flying out on a family holiday, actually.
Oh, wow.
Remember precisely kind of what happened when we were contacted because they were turning the aeroplanes around in the sky to say, no, this is just not going to happen. And we'd seen what had been happening in China, we'd seen kind of creeping across, seen Italy. So we kind of had already been thinking, actually, we need to start preparing for this. We'd been lucky enough, I'd say lucky, maybe insightful enough, that's lucky enough, that we had been rolling out a big technology kind of refresh over the past year, 18 months, to try to move to a more modern and flexible way of working anyway. So we'd provided all of our office-based staff with laptops and agile working because we wanted them to be able to work in the best way that they possibly could to deliver great customer services. So if it just didn't make sense to come into the office and that they should be going and stopping in a cafe, connecting to the Wi-Fi between meetings or between site visits, that makes sense.
Why not?
And it's productive, etc. So we'd been rolling that out. And then I remember it was the Monday that was the first of, we had over here at 5 o'clock every single day, the government did a briefing at 5 o'clock. And at first of all, that was absolutely awful because it was at the end of the day and you kind of think it gives us no chance as an executive and as the decision makers to actually prepare and plan for the next day. Actually having to think about it on reflection, it did give us a really good opportunity. So I knew that all of my peers on the executive team was watching the news or watching the government briefing at 5 o'clock. We then had a couple of hours to think about planning how that was going to impact our areas of the business. And we'd jump on a call then at kind of 8 o'clock almost every night, being ready and prepared for what we were going to say and the key lines of communication for our staff the next morning. So we were able to always be on the front foot for that. I think we went there for that. So the Monday was the first one of those briefings. We went into Tuesday saying to our staff, we're going to test our systems. We're going to ask you, we gave them 24 hours notice to say, all of you work from home. We know that you've got the equipment to do so, but we've never tested our systems and our platforms at 100% of everybody pushing them through kind of the broadband and that type of thing. So we get 4 hours to do that. That happened on Wednesday, and by Wednesday afternoon, when we knew that the systems could stand up from everybody being from home, we kind of said that was it. We've gone back in.
Yeah.
So I think it was that kind of the speed of things that were happening. By Friday, the schools had closed, and that kind of first week was just everything happened so quickly. That I think it forced you into a different type of decision-making mode and a different leadership style as well.
Yeah, and do you think the learnings for your people, your executive, and the people in the culture of your business is actually going to take some lessons and perhaps some license from that experience? I was talking to Govern Smart of the CIH last night, and he was saying, in a recent conversation with someone from the sector over there, they were talking about a project which traditionally would have taken 12 months to deploy, that they deployed in 4 weeks without all the necessary paperwork and the I's dotted and the T's crossed, etc. Do you think it's actually going to create a more adaptable One Housing workforce, do you think?
Yeah, without a doubt. I think we were probably aiming to look towards that anyway. So we'd adopted kind of agile working styles. We're trying to apply kind of lean methodology to things around performance measurements and that type of thing. And I think you're absolutely right. What then happens is that it provides a kind of an incentive. It just projects all of that forward. And so I think one of the things actually I think that you could also see is that some of those slightly more invisible teams that keep the organisation running, but they are slightly in the background and people don't necessarily think about them too much, I think have really stepped into the limelight to be able to keep businesses going. And I'd probably kind of shout out to the IT teams and the internal communication teams that have really stepped up during this period, and they've become kind of crucial teams, quite visibly crucial teams, rather than perhaps that a little bit kind of in the background, because being able to kind of push out and keeping your services going just like that, really quickly, has been really important. So I think some of the lessons around being brave, around actually how agile you can be, about kind of the decision making in kind of in a vacuum, and that type of thing, I think is certainly some of the strengths that we will want to continue with.
Yeah. Ria, how many staff do you have?
1,600.
1,600. Just thinking, one of the maybe the back office that probably doesn't get the limelight enough as well is probably call center staff. I was just seeing 2018-19, you took 126,000 calls. I dare say that number is going to be significantly higher. They must have had a fair workload.
Yeah, and I think it was absolutely astonishing that, as I said, we gave that call centre 24 hours notice to start working from home.
Yeah,
they've never ever done anything like that. And you kind of think, actually, what does the individual kind of call handler need in terms of support to be able to respond, to answer the queries, that type of thing? And they have been absolutely amazing in being able to work in a remote environment and still keep those call levels up. And I think you see the queries coming in at the beginning when you go through a change period. We've then seen kind of actually queries drop off as we moved to only emergency repairs. Is predominantly where our customer contact is. And then it has, the trajectory started to kind of go up again. And one of the things, I guess, from lessons learned, maybe from your previous question, is about actually what do you do in those kind of spaces where things just pause slightly. So we moved to emergency repairs, and with that pause of the incoming calls that were coming in, we actually decided that we're going to start making the outbound calls and push those up so that we could do welfare checks and we could get improve our data accuracy, and make sure that we've got good customer information and such. So I think it kind of some of the advantages to shifting your work program is that you can do things that you just don't have that kind of capacity or bandwidth to do when you're running at business as usual pace.
Yeah, it's quite an amazing outcome. And what does in the post-COVID world, from a work workforce perspective and a work management perspective. What do you think will you carry into that new world, and or will you go back to how it was prior to?
No, I think so. We absolutely don't want to go back to how it was before. I think there are advantages and disadvantages to how we are working now. I think we probably shouldn't pretend that everything is kind of great working from home and working in this remote way, because you do see some of the strains somewhat. But I do think that being able to give people that flexibility, I think the focus a bit more on outputs. So it's almost forced our managers to be moving towards that much more kind of modern management style of avoiding managing around presenteeism and actually looking at the outputs of what people do, which empowers people to be able to do their jobs in a way that, is kind of more engaging to them. So there's a whole set of advantages, I think, there that we would certainly want to keep. I think it's really affected our communication style as well, both internally and externally. I think we've had to become much, much more proactive. And we've also been really, really encouraging our workforce. We've got quite a large workforce. They are quite disparate. They're all over the place doing all different types of business activities. And we've really encouraged them to be sharing information to try to keep that kind of organisational cohesion as much as we possibly can. And people have really stepped up to that. So that's been really good, I think, to see. And of course, we have been pushing out as much communication as we possibly can. And then probably maybe that third thing that I'd say that we would want to keep is that I do think that it has made leaders rethink some of their leadership styles. And I think we're seeing we're seeing styles from heads of state around the world. We're seeing styles from big popular kind of global companies, and you see the public putting people into a kind of a good box and a bad box. A fair amount of kind of judgments about how people are responding towards this, and you can see that those that are gaining popularity are really basing their style around trust, around empathy, openness, really smart communication styles. And I do hope that leaders will think a bit more about kind of behavioural theories and communication style, and that we will try to embed that a bit more in leadership styles.
Yeah, and is there a kind of an international leader that you look at and go, what if we could create a carbon copy of that leader for One Housing and our people? Is there someone that you look at, Ria, and go, what, that's best practice right there?
Yeah, so interestingly, I think there's kind of two styles that I think are being talked about an awful lot, certainly kind of over here, that are being talked about an awful lot. The first is we seem to be comparing, every political leader at the moment to Churchill. When in actual fact, my view, and I am talking to last week, one of our Future of London podcasts that we do around London and the built environment, and we were talking about, actually, I think that kind of command style of leadership style is fundamentally flawed when you're looking at this type of crisis that goes on for a considerable period of time. So it might be fine in very short term parts, but actually what you need from your leadership is depth of leadership within your teams, rather than one person making quick decisions, because this is a much kind of, it's a really complex problem, multiple parts constantly shifting. So I think there's the bit which is actually, let's not pretend that this is a simple bit that is just going to end. One day it came and the end, and the next day it's going to end. This will obviously be with us for some considerable time. There is an awful lot of talk kind of in the UK around Jacinda Ardern's style, and really kind of holding up her onto kind of a pillar of, this is what good leadership looks like. And I think there's a whole set of examples that can be given around actually how you empathy, how you can be really kind of honest and open with people, and how you set up your the people that are following you, essentially, whether that is kind of a head of state or whether that's chief executive of an organisation, how you get people to trust you and to follow you through this together, rather than creating a kind of an us and them.
Yeah, and I think Jacinta Ardern, certainly from our neck of the woods, the person who's spoken about a lot from, the Christchurch massacre right through to her handling of COVID-19. I think it's an interesting kind of concept as well around empathy and perhaps compassion, but that empathy, because I think we get a lot of cues from culture, development, leadership, perhaps from successful sporting organisations. I've also seen coaches and managers and presidents of sporting clubs talking about empathy, compassion, and love. And we're talking about sports that are combative and dirty and blood and guts and blood, sweat, and tears, etc. The vernacular seems to be changing, which is possibly not a bad thing.
Yeah, and I think if you look at kind of some of those kind of basic human needs, a lot of it forms around a really basic need for the feeling of security. If you feel as though somebody cares for you, if you feel as though your manager or your leader actually cares for you and they take a genuine interest in your health and your well-being, and health and well-being, being brutally honest, of course, it's higher performance. So commercially, it is absolutely the right thing to be kind of focusing on. Then I think that is I think a much more kind of modern ways that we're kind of talking about much more around inspiring teams. Because I think you see direct then impacts towards delivery of customer services, continuous improvement. Those high performing companies are filled with people that as an individual, they care about what the company is trying to achieve.
Yeah, absolutely. And I read in your most recent annual review, or what we call here an annual report, a focus on creating a modern, flexible and fun place to work. What's fun about coming to work at One Housing, Ria? Is it can you take your dogs to work Friday or something like that?
And I'm absolutely chuffed that we actually put that word fun into the plan, which is traditionally, they are very formal documents. They go out to investors, to the regulator, to all sorts, and that we deliberately used that word fun because actually we want our workforce to be highly engaged and to enjoy doing what they do, because we know that if people enjoy what they're doing, if they believe in the concept and the purpose of what they're doing, we know that people will work harder and they will perform better. What we're trying to create, and as I'd said before, we're dealing with a very highly emotional product, as it were. When you're talking about people's homes, it's their lives that we're making a difference, and we're kind of doing. And therefore, we want people to think very carefully, kind of what they do, and to be really attached to the organisation. And I think I do certainly want people to have fun, and of course it's going to be serious, and of course there's going to be times that you don't enjoy bits of your job. We all have that. I think as long as the majority of it is healthy, fun, happy teams, then you're going to get the best of people.
Yeah, and I think it's really critical in high stress, high pressure environments. So I think I've come out of the mental health space, and we worked in a really extraordinarily tough part of that sector. And I used to say to my team that if we can't have fun at work when the chips are down and it's really tough, we're going to find it hard to be around one another. So we need to find ways to have fun. We actually adopted quite an Australian kind of concept, being a nickname. So everyone actually had a nickname. So you might be a doctor of psychiatry, but you still had a nickname. And we actually found that just took the edge off the conversations that were at times incredibly tough, incredibly hard to digest what was happening in the community. But it just gave us that little bit of room to be ourselves.
Yeah, and that's really important, isn't it? And I think that's what we were talking about, those political leaders, particularly, is at a time like this, you really want to see that they are human and that they have a recognition that people are going through really, really difficult and tough times. And these leaders are not making decisions just sat around in kind of their ivory towers, far, far removed from that. So the fact that kind of Jacinta Ardern is putting onto Facebook a video in her kind of sweatshirt, having put the baby to bed. The relationship, the virtual relationship that she is able to build with the nation through doing that, I think is really, so it's maybe a step away perhaps of that leadership style that I do think that we've had in the past, which is a pressure on the leader to come across as perfect. But that is that you lose the kind of the authenticity, and you lose giving people an insight into who you are as a human being. You said kind of, can you bring the dogs and can you bring people to work at one housing on at Christmas time? We had a bring your family to work day, or bring your children to work day. And we had a Christmas tree, we had presents, we had all sorts of activities and things like that. Because I think, there's what COVID, I think, has probably highlighted is that we've got to accept that the lines between work, family, all are becoming very, very blurred. And I think that was happening anyway with the advance of technology. But I think this has really, really catapulted it forward.
Yeah, and I think the realization that people bring themselves to work and all their problems as well. We adopted a very simple model in one of the firms that I worked with, that we actually ranked how we were feeling going into that working week, coming off the back of a weekend. And we had people who are very high performance come out and say, look, this week I'm actually feeling like I'm a 2 out of 5. And you'd say, well, how can we support you? And they say, well, things aren't great at home, for instance. So I'm bringing that to work, and you can't expect that person to be 110% at work when they've got things happening in their life. So that's I think that's really important. I just wanted to ask you, Ria, in respect to again, just reading some of your literature online, you've got a really strong diversity focus. I'm just wondering whether you could talk through some of the strategies you've got in that area. One I'm keen to know more about is your Women in Leadership program.
Yeah, sure. So I think the starting point, I think, to this is that we believe that diversity should be a key part in actually how you run your business. So it is about actually how the business performs. It's about the governance of how you run your organisation, because we absolutely believe that having a diverse organisation gives you better insight into the customers that you are serving. It gives you greater diversity of thought around the boardroom. It delivers better business decisions. It gains greater trust, I think, with the communities that we're working in. I mean, particularly given that we work in London, one of the most diverse cities in the world. It would be very, very difficult for us to have anything but a diverse workforce. And what we must ensure is that we have that diversity through all levels of our structures as well. And then I think the third point that we really try to make clear in our messaging around diversity is that is really kind of the war on skills and talent. It is very, very competitive out in the marketplace for that. And you can't overlook, I think, kind of some of the corners of the candidate market and the candidate pools that others may overlook because they don't embrace diversity. So I think kind of working on that basis, we believe is absolutely integral to a well-run and a well-led organisation. And so we look at a lot of data on our workforce. We try to look at data and match up with the community demographics. And what we typically see is that around the middle levels of structures, and we see this around, this the middle levels of structures, you start to see that diversity fall off, particularly around ethnicity and gender. So we have been developing, and we've successfully run our Women in Leadership program, which aims to, it doesn't necessarily tip over into some of the quite typical kind of leadership styles and that kind of training. What it does is it provides a safe place for women to explore things around self-limiting beliefs. Because I think as an employer, it is really difficult, and I find it really frustrating when you are trying to improve diversity in your organisation. But at the point when somebody puts their first, takes their first step in the door of an employer, it's kind of too late, because they've been through an education system. They've been raised by, in a society that is already put and formed kind of the way that their brain is wired with kind of unconscious bias and prejudices that we kind of see all around us. So we try to provide a space in the Women for Leadership program to try to work through some of those self-limiting beliefs, to work through kind of emotional intelligence, some of the triggers when you're in situations, and trying to avoid that kind of fight and flight kind of responses. So how can you actually effectively communicate when an emotion has been triggered because of whatever situation that you are in. You know, how do you successfully respond if you walk into a boardroom, you're the only woman there, and sharing some of the experiences of, quite often you are asked to go and make the cup of tea, or to take the notes, or to sit at the corner of the table, and how do you respond to kind of some of those things? There's some practical bits as well. So that's been great, and we've rolled that out across the sector too, and a lot of it is based on kind of positive psychology. It's some of it, and then we are going to be releasing next week a really large Black and minority ethnic focused leadership program, and that's it's a 15 to 18 month leadership program, which will be based around, it's one of our Chartered Management Institute qualifications. And again, that is across 12 of the largest housing associations in London, again, trying to build that talent pipeline so that we can see greater diversity being built up through into our leadership roles.
Yeah, and is the can I just go on just on that? Do you find that the female members of your workforce are really pushing for positions in management, senior management in One Housing? Are they feeling really positive about making that step as they should?
So I think yes and no. So
Okay.
I think absolutely you get some individuals that are really kind of pushing forward, grabbing every opportunity that they possibly can, and then you also get an equally significant number of people that do suffer from self-limiting beliefs and don't see enough kind of role models and women at the top of organisations to be able to say, actually, I can do that too, because there are other people that are doing it. So I think we still kind of face a little bit of having to be the first to step into that space and be the role model, which, quite often you have to be very brave to do. So I do think there's a lot about kind of the role modelling and kind of some of the mentoring and sponsorship as well that we are trying to explore. To try and improve that picture.
Yeah, that's brilliant. You mentioned before about the war on talent. So we in the Australasian market, we have the same. We are really focused on raising the profile of the sector and really saying to people, this is a place where you not only can be reasonably paid well, you can have challenging work environment, but you're really making a difference in people's lives. They're the kind of three kind of key components. Talking to Gavin last night, he said that's no different in the UK. A lot of people find themselves in the sector rather than finishing uni or school and saying that's where I want to be. How do you guys really drive a message to the population outside of your organisation to say this is a place for you to come and prosper?
Yeah, so I think housing is quite a critical thing in the UK. It is quite often in the headlines of the news, every single day. I do think actually it's had a higher profile as well since the Grenfell tragedy. And we've had to see a difference, I think, in the shift in the skill set as well around some of the kind of the professional building safety aspects as well, which is a long-term challenge because we do have a shortage in those types of skills. I think part of the challenges that we have faced over the years is not necessarily working together as a sector to successfully portray a brand into the kind of the marketplace. So I think you're absolutely right. When people come out of university, very, very rarely do they stick their hand up and go, I want to work in social housing. Quite often we accidentally fall into this sector and then fall in love with it and never leave. But the real challenge, of course, is trying to attract people into this place. We have run a number of really, really successful graduate schemes, actually, to try to really develop that kind of grow your own model of bringing, really, really bright talent in and not necessarily putting them at entry-level roles, actually giving them a decent amount of responsibility from day one, and trying to kind of position this as obviously an organisation that has a very, very heavy social purpose. And I think we are seeing kind of a generational shift towards kind of sustainability, environment, social purpose becoming much, much more important. So I think we should absolutely be maximising the opportunity around that. And the graduate schemes that we have run, we've gone heavy with that social purpose. We've offered, I think, things we've tried to think about, almost kind of think about the customer, actually the candidate. So what is it? What would attract people coming out of university? What are the things that are attractive to them? So, career plans, having a trajectory of knowing that they are going to be able to move forward with their career, having responsibility from day one, rather than kind of going around and making the teas. They've just come out of university. They're smart people. They're smart adults. Kind of treat them like that. And we've always been able to really, really successfully. I mean, I think the last one that we did, we have over 600 applicants for 6 positions for it. So I think there is a bit of kind of being able to capture the graduates. I think the other challenge, however, for us is avoiding the same people just going round and round and round housing associations within the sector. How do we actually get some of the new transferable skills into the sector as well to create a larger candidate pool? And I think that is really challenging. And I think one of the ways that we have to be able to do that is to develop really, really strong partnerships with the recruitment organisations and the recruitment agencies, because we're not big enough to compete with some of the big brand names out there, whether that's the accountancy firms or retail or media. We're not big enough to kind of to do that on our own, but we can take those opportunities that the recruitment people have because they already have those doors that are open. And I think kind of thinking about it from a what professional environment and what is the employee experience, what can the candidate get out of it, I think has been really crucial to us.
Yeah, and what are those skills in demand, Ria? Is that data analytics? Is that an area that you look at, or is there something more broader that you guys think are the demand skills that we need to really be planning for?
Yeah, so I touched on kind of building safety, and I'd probably put kind of construction building safety kind of into one pot, in terms of that we know that we have a problem in the UK in terms of skill shortages, and it doesn't look good when you actually project forward over 10 years, because we don't see pipeline of that kind of coming through. So we know that is kind of one issue. I think I wouldn't necessarily, this might be slightly controversial, but I wouldn't necessarily say I think that the tech and the data analytics is a skills shortage, because I think you see enough of those skills coming through out of colleges, out of universities, around and about. I think the challenge there is to attract them into our organisations. I think the skill there is just we need to capture them. The other bit that slightly keeps me up at night is actually trying to get our management and leadership capabilities better, I think, kind of as a sector. So we've gone from being kind of very, very charitable organisations set up 50, 60 years ago with a lot of the Cafe Come Home movements, very, very charitable objectives, and a shift, I think, probably over the past maybe 10 to 15 years towards being much, much more commercial and much more kind of standing on our own 2 feet. However, I think we still need to up some of the leadership capabilities, kind of just broadly speaking, of course, because then I think what we were talking about that kind of compassion, the empathy, how do you really inspire teams to drive high performance? How do you deliver that kind of strategic narrative of giving the context to people of, actually, this is the impact and this is the difference that you are making to people's lives? Kind of what we need is really, really good, strong managers and leaders to be able to all the way through our workforces, given that housing associations in the UK, there's some considerable numbers. They're not quite, a lot of them, and they're not small in terms of the workforces that we're dealing with. So I think that kind of leadership style is becoming more and more important the bigger that we grow.
Yeah, no, that's really, really great. And I think just lastly, Ria, now it's 8:15 your time. You've been up nice and early to meet with me this morning your time, so I really appreciate that. But are there, I suppose, the essence of qualities and experiences that for you as a people leader within your organisation are just non-negotiables for you when you go out to market looking for talent? Is there those couple of things that you go, that's what we want in the people that work for our organisation?
So I think that I certainly subscribe to the principle of if somebody doesn't have some of the technical skills, then we can teach them that. What I can't teach is attitude and whether someone genuinely cares about wanting to do a good job and work for us. So I think it is a real challenge, and we haven't nailed it yet. We haven't kind of perfected a bit of how do we actually sift out and really find those people that absolutely care. They really, really care about doing so. So that is I think one thing that I certainly place a huge amount of importance on. The other one, I think, when we're looking through at managers, is that I don't really want to see people that have been really, really good at their job get promoted into being a people manager because they were really good at their last job. What we're looking for is for people that can actually inspire people and lead them and manage them really well. Those people management side, that isn't a bolt-on to do when you've finished your to-do list with the rest of your activities. That is a part, and it's the people management stuff that has to come first. And we really need our managers to understand that.
Yeah.
So I think that is probably would be my second one. And then I think maybe the third one, and again, this is one that I think kind of too often goes unnoticed, is I'd really like to see a bit more of, and I'd love to see it articulated as well in adverts and job descriptions as well, is finding that person that gels the team together. So that person, when you were saying earlier, you've got a couple of team members that are scoring their happiness as a 2 out of 5 coming in from the weekend. Actually, we all have those people in the teams that they gel the team together. They make people laugh. They that fun and that happiness and kind of and therefore that kind of psychological health as well of the team together and upwards. And I think we quite often just kind of look over that. So I think thinking about actually we're recruiting team members. We're not always recruiting just individuals.
Yeah, I think it's important that people know their role, but know their role in the broader context of the team. Interesting that person I was referring to as a 2 out of 5 was the person the week before who would have been a 5 out of 5, who told the really ordinary jokes, who bonded the team, who called out behaviours when it wasn't where it needed to be, had lots of fun, etc. So we knew as a group that we really needed to get behind this person and give her the support she needed.
And it's people having that emotional intelligence, isn't it? To actually go, they're looking a bit off today.
Correct.
Actually have to step in and just make sure that this doesn't get worse and worse and worse. I might add one more actually, Mark. I think a kind of an interest in kind of the outcomes of what we deliver as an organisation. So whether you're the finance clerk, whether you're the HR assistant, whether you work on the front line, actually that interest in seeing what it is that we do, I think is really, really important. And one of the things that I think COVID has really, really highlighted is some of those darker and kind of those nastier parts of society that were largely invisible because we all ran off to our offices and that we didn't hang around in our communities so much. I think those darker parts of our communities and our societies are becoming much, much more visible. So domestic violence, drug abuse, things that children are witnessing at home, noise, kind of antisocial behaviour. Because we're stuck in our homes now, I think it's becoming more visible and we're witnessing that. And I think certainly one of the things that that we have seen at One Housing is just that kind of the community cohesion was really, really pulled together. And I think regardless of what role you undertake in the organisation, I really, really want people that get that and that care about it and want to go out and actually see what do our communities look like and actually how can we help grow and leave a legacy for our communities. And so people are interested in that bigger picture.
Yeah, it's interesting you'd mentioned that. We ran a panel webinar maybe 3 or 4 weeks into the lockdown, and we brought in some domestic violence experts here in Australia, and they talked about the incidence of domestic violence raising because work for some people was actually a safe place to go.
Absolutely.
Because the violence was happening at home, and it kind of just hit me right between the eyes, and I was just like, oh wow, I never really thought about it that way. We also had one of our very first Industry Connect interviews with a gentleman here, Steve Bevington, who's the CEO of Community Housing Limited. He told his story of living rough on the streets of London, you know, living above the subway, and getting the warm air from the trains, keeping him warm through the winter. So he gave the real context around, we're asking people to self-isolate, but what do we do with people who are homeless? And Gavin talked last night about some of the initiatives there in the UK, but it really started to bring the real challenge in the community that we're all got a responsibility to help solve and resolve. That's in front of us. So there's some silver lining in what's been a very dark cloud.
Yeah, and that perhaps goes back to one of your questions, really, about kind of what are the things that we've seen as changes, and maybe what are some of the strengths that we've seen as a result of kind of having to move on that. And the homelessness. I think I'd be really proud of housing associations in this country who have really supported and stepped in to support what are very, very stretched public services. And you kind of, with the work that has been done on homelessness with a local authority directive, to essentially, we need to get homeless people, rough sleepers, off of the streets, and that just happened. And you kind of think it's staggering when there is that very, very crucial incentive to make it happen, that we do actually make it happen. The kind of the support that we're giving with our NHS to get people out of hospitals so that we can free up hospital space to deal with COVID. Again, that is saving so much money and pressure for the NHS, and that we've managed to kind of step into that. I'll say for communities team, the workload has absolutely gone through the roof, and we're trying to take pressure off the police around kind of the antisocial behaviour and things. In our youth activities, I mean, you can kind of go on and on and on, because the kids aren't going to school. We're putting in place kind of tutoring plans. We've been doing kind of online teaching and digital engagement with the young residents. So you can kind of see that I think housing associations are really, really well placed, because they are such a core part of the community. They're really well placed to be facilitating those cornerstones, I think, of society, and to kind of be stepping in and seeing where those gaps are.
Yeah, and I think absolutely, and I think the real kind of what's really resonated with me is that human beings generally have a real ability to adapt and change very quickly, and we don't give ourselves enough credit for that. I know I went into a place called Bundarace after the Boxing Day tsunami, about 30 days after the tsunami kind of washed away the whole city pretty much. 30 days in, the infrastructure was being rebuilt, the markets reopened, kids back at school, people with smiles on their faces, and I just went, oh my God, if this happened in our own country, we'd be in mourning for years trying to get over the fact that this has happened. But human beings are just incredibly resilient.
Absolutely. So I think whilst that that's a really, really positive note, I think it's a good point that we are very resilient, but also I think that we will need to be, because I can't see this being a kind of a short, medium term problem.
That's it. Now, Ria, you've got a day job and your day's started, so I want to we might leave it there if that's okay with you. And I want to just say thank you for your time, your insight and your knowledge of housing in the UK. We really take a lot of appreciation for you giving up your time and sharing that. And I'm sure our audience here in Australia and in New Zealand are going to really enjoy this. So I want to thank you, and I look forward. I want to maybe talk to you in 12 months on the anniversary of your new Labrador, maybe just to see whether you're as calm as you were when we first got on the call, or whether things have changed maybe.
She's run me ragged.
Yeah. What you didn't tell me your dog's name?
Molly.
Molly, fantastic. Well, on behalf of everyone in Australia and New Zealand, we hope that you do well, but also Molly is the dog that you need, and your son really enjoys Molly growing up.
Thank you so much, Mark.
Yeah.
It's been brilliant to talk through some of these kind of similarities and the kind of challenges and the difficulties around it as well. So no, thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, no, thank you for your time. It's been wonderful.
Brilliant.
All right.